For more than 3 decades now, Project Censored has been producing a list of the most censored stories in America. Their present director, Peter Phillips, sat down with me today to discuss censorship in America and Project Censored's new book, Censored '08. The name of your book, Censored '08, is...
It just came out. We treat it like an almanac, so it comes out in September. We call it Censored '08, so it'll be selling for the next year. And it covers stories up through April of 2007. So it's very current. 7 Stories Press gets it out really quickly. We get it out in the summer. We finish writing, it's turned, it's edited, and it's printed by August each year. So,
but you prominently use the term censored. And a lot of people in America are going to say, hey, we have a free press. It's a free market system. Does censorship really exist?
Of course. Because none of these stories, and they're very important stories, were covered by the mainstream media. Now, how that happens, this is where we have to take a broader understanding of what censorship means. We refer it to as any interference with the free flow of information in society. So we know that there isn't a government agency, well, there certainly is during war, but not a government agency that's censoring material on a daily basis overtly in the United States. What we have is a very concentrated, very powerful media system that's in business literally to entertain people and sell eyeballs to advertisers. And they tend very strongly not to want to offend the powerful, not to in any way offend their sources of news. So like CNN keeps an office in the Pentagon. So they get these breaking news stories on a regular basis. So they tend not to be critical of their primary sources of news, which is the Pentagon, the White House, State Department, big corporations. So you have what we see as a structural understanding. Now you add to that the ownership of the media in the United States, which is very corporate. We've analyzed, the top 130 individuals in the corporate media today that are on all the boards of directors. They're interlocked with 20% of the corporate 1,000. These are bankers and lawyers and really powerful people. And they're the ones that hire the managers, and they're the ones that hire the publishers within that system. And they have expectations about what's going to be covered, what's good for them, what's good for their bottom line. And those expectations become a culture within the organization. So that journalists learn very quickly when you're hired that certain stories are good to push, certain stories will go well, and other ones they are not really very interested in you doing that very, very hard. And there's plenty of journalists who've lost their jobs for doing important news stories. So whether it's April Oliver and Jack Smith at CNN over the sarin gas story during Vietnam, or the bovine growth hormone story. There's a lot of journalists. Even Gary Webb of the San Jose Mercury News for taking on the CIA. Those journalists lost their jobs mid-career, never went to work in other big media again. And every single journalist knows that. And so if it's a story that's going to rock boats, their career could be on the line.
We've seen stories like My Lai exposed. Is that an exception to the rule?
Was 40 years ago. And yes, at that time there were probably at least 75 major media distributors in the United States. Now we have less than 10. And it's very concentrated, it's very shared, it's very profit-oriented. There's fewer reporters especially doing investigative work, and they're nowhere near as free as they were 40 years ago. Which didn't mean that we got the whole story 40 years ago. We didn't. But today we get very little, and it's packaged and presented. In fact, there's these huge mega corporations called public relation firms, WPP, Omnicom. They're the ones that write and create news stories that the media runs. So the Bush administrations, up through July of 2005, the previous 18 months, had spent $1.6 billion on public relation firms. $1 billion of that was in the Pentagon. So they're hiring PR firms to create the Jessica Lynch stories and the pulling down of the statue of Saddam Hussein stories. Those were fabricated, prepackaged news stories that went out, and that's what we see. And they're meant to give us misinformation. They're meant to psychologically kind of keep us thinking that the Iraqis support the war, that it's a good place to be. And it's not news.
And you, in your book, have an update to Noam Chomsky's famed manufacturing consent and the filters in media that he called a propaganda model.
Yes.
How does that work in today's society? That was written, 25 years ago?
It was written 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
And I wrote that piece for the 20-year conference of Chomsky's propaganda model. And Herman and Chomsky were at the conference. It was in Windsor, Canada, last June. And the piece was to take a look at how independent media, the left progressive press, is also influenced. And so we took the top 10 independent media groups, Democracy Now!, Mother Jones, Truthout, and then we looked at 8 key stories that have evolved over the last few years, and to see how even the left progressive press had covered them. And some they did very well on impeachment and on voter fraud, and then some when it came to like Building 7 at the World Trade Center and or the Israeli-Palestine death rates, things like that. There's a sensitivity that certain stories don't get covered as well.
Why do you think this happens even in the left media?
I think that some of these stories are so sensitive. They're either called conspiracy stories, or they're seen as anti-Israel, or they're perceived in a way that they're just discredited, like the voter fraud and election fraud in 2004. The exit polls clearly show us that Kerry was predicted to win by 6 million votes. Bush won by 3 million. That's a 9 million vote discrepancy. The vote discrepancy happened primarily in only 13 states. The statistical possibilities of that, any statistician can look at it, and a lot of people have. It's impossible. It's literally zero. It's millions to one that the polls were in some way wrong. And countries all around the world use polling to verify their elections. And in our case, we had a fraudulent election. There's just no question about it.
For next year, do you see any stories that are developing right now that next year you think are going to be censored 09? Are you looking at that already?
Sure.
What's out
We've
there
got stories up on the table, already a couple hundred that have been nominated.
Anything that comes to mind? What do you think is?
Well, stuff about Iran is certainly evolving, and the operations that have been ongoing for a long time. We've had CIA and special forces groups. There's Blackwater on the borders. There's a lot of pressure to try to create or certainly get Iran to step down from their stance against us. It's about oil. It's about power. It's about geopolitical influence in the regions. So there's a lot of stories involving around our affairs worldwide.
Over the next year, Truthout will strive to bring you and expose the types of stories that will appear in Censored 09. This has been Jeff Millard reporting from the Media Accountability Conference in Sonoma, California.